Hello and welcome to this Euractiv event. My name is Natasha Foote. I am a journalist here at Euractiv and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panellist discussion on the poultry sector and its role in the EU's flagship food policy, the Farm to Fork strategy. So this strategy, which was released earlier this year, lies at the heart of the European Green Deal. It aims to transform the EU farming sector to make food systems fair, healthy and environmentally friendly, while also ensuring a robust farming system that is able to withstand NOx and meet the food needs of the population. The policy works to encompass every aspect of the food chain, from producers to processors and also on the consumer side of things, so it holds great implications for the farming sector as a whole. But specifically, the meat sector has featured heavily in the sustainability debate, creating a question mark over what the future of the sector looks like and how this can be aligned with sustainability goals. The Farm to Fork strategy lays out a number of targets and goals which specifically impact the meat sector, from targets on the sales of antibiotics to a strong focus on improving animal welfare, which is set to take centre stage in agri-food policy over the coming months as a key theme of the German presidency priorities. But the meat and livestock sector is not homogeneous, and every subsection within this carries its own challenges and specific issues, and also its own opportunities for contributing to sustainability goals. So we often hear a lot about beef in the sustainability debate, but today it's poultry's turn for a moment in the spotlight. So will the Farm to Fork strategy be winner winner chicken dinner for the poultry sector? Well, we're here today to discuss this and more. But before we get stuck into the debate, I'm just going to pass you to my colleague Teresa, who's going to go through a few housekeeping rules with you.
Good afternoon and welcome. When writing your questions in the Q&A section, which you can find on the right side of your screen, make sure to please identify yourself, keep your questions short and concise, and also let us know to which speaker you are addressing your question. Thank you very much and enjoy the debate.
Thank you very much, Teresa. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists for today's event. So with us today, we're very happy to welcome Sabine Julicke, who is the Director for Food and Feed Safety and Innovation at DG Santi, so the Directorate General for Health and Food Safety of the European Commission. We also have with us Frédéric Leroy, who is a Professor of Industrial Microbiology and Food Biotechnology at Vrije University in Brussels. We also have John T. Whittleton, who is the Global Head of Campaign Farming at the World Animal Protection, so that's a charity that works on issues of welfare. And we also have Bertit Steenberg, who is the Secretary General of AVEC, the voice of the EU poultry meat sector, who is also the sponsor of today's event. So a very warm welcome to all of you. I'm now going to turn to each of our panellists for their introductory remarks on how they see the role of the poultry and more widely the meat sector fitting into the goals of the Farm to Fork strategy. So Sabine, let me start with you. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Natasha, for the kind introduction and invitation to today's event. I can still remember vividly the Euractiv event when we were discussing what to put into the Farm to Fork strategy. Was quite some time before the strategy was finally released. And I think already at that time it was an event attracting a lot of attention. Now, today's topic, what role for poultry meat in the Farm to Fork strategy? I think Natasha, you already put it very, very correctly. We are talking here about a very comprehensive strategy that looks for fairness, that looks for health, that looks for environmentally friendly production and consumption patterns. And to make it very simple, there is a role and a place for everyone in that strategy. If we want to make this transition in Europe towards a more sustainable food system, we will need every player, everyone, to play their part and to contribute and make the necessary changes. And starting a bit with the end of your introduction, the way we see this as European Commission, all of those who will make this transition, who will make steps in this transition, are meant and are supposed to be winners. We want those who contribute, we want those who make these steps to more sustainable production to be winners in our food systems of the future. Now, you spoke about, the role of meat and meat in diets. I think here I would really want to say it is not about, one or the other protein source. Overall, we understand that in Europe, our diets are not healthy, that there are too much protein-based protein from animal origin. There are many valid protein sources in our diets, but we definitely would like to consumers to move to more healthy consumption patterns, which means more plant-based diets. On the other hand, I think it is not about offsetting one protein source of the other. What is important in this context, and I think I would really want this to be the focus of at least my contribution to the discussion, is how each sector can engage in optimizing their production systems and subsequent steps in terms of sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sabine. Okay, I'm now going to turn to you, Berta, for your introductory remarks. The floor is yours.
A lot to my fellow panelists and to all of you attendees out there joining in the debate today. It's a very important debate. We really need to create a fair, healthy, and sustainable food system in the EU. There's no doubt about it. I mean, we have to leave a good planet and a good environment for our future generations. And the overall goals in the Farm to Fork strategy from the European Commission are really appealing to me. Good goals. Ensuring that the food chain has a neutral or positive environmental impact, hard to argue against. Ensuring food security, nutrition, and public health, making sure that everyone has access to sufficient, nutritious, and sustainable food. Thumbs up from me. And to preserve the affordability of food. And when I read this, to my mind, it comes springing in, European poultry meat is part of the solution. We really feel that we are, because European poultry meat is very climate smart, has a low climate impact. European poultry meat is very nutritious, a very good source of protein, and it's also produced in a sustainable way, and it's an affordable commodity. Of course, things can be done better, and I really liked the opening remarks of Sabine Jolicha that everybody needs to deliver on this agenda, and I totally agree. And I think it's so important, and all of us from AVEC, from the European poultry sector, finds that it's so important that we have debates like this, that we go together, European Commission, European Parliament, NGOs, the sectors, and others who have an opinion on how our food systems should look in the future, and that we debate and discuss and find out the best solutions based on a scientific level. Because we need to sit together. We are not achieving anything by sitting in different corners and shouting at each other. We need to come together to find the best solutions. So my great-grandchildren also have a fine planet to live on. I'm really looking forward to this debate, and let's get it going. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bertie. Okay, I'm going to now pass over to you, John T.
Thank you, Natasha, and good afternoon, everyone. As Natasha said, I'm John T. Whittleton, Global Campaign Head at World Animal Protection. We're a global animal protection organisation, as the name suggests, that works with stakeholders at all levels, from multilateral organisations to country governments, global companies to industry groups, ultimately to shift to a world without animal cruelty. And while our focus is on the welfare of farmed and wild animals, we're also closely involved in those really vital intersectional issues that impact on and are impacted by animal welfare, climate change, human health, antibiotic overuse, biodiversity loss, development, and so on. We believe that animal welfare really does sit at the heart of sustainable development, and we're working to ensure that the concept is embedded in efforts to build a more just and a more sustainable food system. The welfare of meat chickens is an issue that we also believe is critically important. Chicken is, of course, the world's most popular meat, and yet all too often little value is placed on the animals who sit at the heart of the system. We're really encouraged that food companies are starting to recognise the needs of chickens, as well as the growing consumer demand for more humane and sustainable food options. I'm talking about the over 150 companies in Europe who've signed up to the European Chicken Commitment, also known as the Better Chicken Commitment, with examples including KFC, Nando's, both of whom we've worked with, but also Nestle, Lidl, Carrefour, Plucon, and the list goes on. These companies have committed to using slower growing breeds of chicken and to give these animals more space, more natural light, more enrichments, all of which allow the animals to exhibit important natural behaviours. And now we're encouraging more companies to do the same. I completely agree with Berta that collaboration here is key. We're not going to get to a sustainable food system unless we work together, unless we have active dialogue. And certainly World Animal Protection doesn't believe that we need to see an end to livestock production. We recognise that farmers who are rearing to high welfare standards should be supported. But what's clear to us is that business as usual is not working, and we need to adapt and improve, or we risk being left behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonty. And now, last but by no means least, over to you, Frédéric, for your introductory remarks.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you very much for inviting me here today, and also for valuing my opinion on what I dare to say, and I suppose most will agree, the very crucial matter of European food production and its future. I've heard some very good and pertinent arguments by the previous panelists, so that looks very promising. But I would like maybe first to sketch my role in and my position in this debate. I'm not here today to speak from within or for the poultry sector, or even as a poultry scientist. I'm not a poultry scientist. Its technical specificities are not my domain of expertise, and neither am I here to point a finger at it. But if I'm participating today, it's mostly to express my judgment as a food scientist on the importance and the pertinence of animal foods, such as poultry, in the European food system and the European market. So I've been looking at different aspects of livestock farming over the last years, and also exploring the need for adequate and sustainable diets at population level. And based on that, I would like to defend basically the increasingly unpopular opinion that animal foods, and therefore also poultry, have a role to play as valuable elements within a larger set of dietary solutions. And I know that we're facing a strong push away from animal foods towards plant-based eating, whatever that may mean. But we need to be careful to make the most robust of decisions, because a lot of our future well-being will depend on policy decisions that are being made or being shaped at this very moment. And I do have to say that I'm a bit worried about some of the evolutions and some of the trends, which are often emotional rather than factual. They tend to be reductionist rather than holistic, and in some cases driven by agendas that are not necessarily in the public interest. So I'd say that what we need is the best science. We need a careful impact assessment, also with respect to side effects, because what's going to happen if we're going to complicate the poultry sector, we're going to restrict it, which benefits will be created and which harms will result, because the value, and it can be, we can talk about the nutritional or the economical value, but the value has to be replaced by something else in that case. And the question is, will it make us better or worse off? And these are not trivial questions, and they certainly don't come with easy answers. So, but let's see how far we get today, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So some really interesting points touched upon by all of you in your introductory remarks, which we're going to delve deeper now with our panelist discussion. So let me first kick off this discussion by setting the scene with a fairly kind of broad question a basic question about poultry specifically. Berta, given your expertise in this area, I think you'd be best placed to answer this question. Tell me, why exactly are we talking about poultry today? How important is the poultry sector, both in the EU and globally? You know, what kind of scale are we talking about here, and why is it important in the sustainability discussion?
That's a really good question. Thanks a lot for asking me that. Jonty has already pointed out that poultry meat is the most eaten meat species in the world. In 2017, the global consumption of poultry went above the global consumption of pork. So now poultry meat is the world leader. And here in the EU, pork is still much more consumed than poultry, but the poultry consumption is still going a little bit up in the EU, while the red meat, the pork and the beef are going a little bit down. And poultry meat is worth discussing because poultry meat has a very low climate impact compared to many other productions. And it's a very sustainable production here in Europe, like the other meat species, because we have been very, very good at producing more with less here in Europe via innovation in many different parts of the production chain. And since 1990, the emissions from the livestock sector in the EU has gone tremendously down, and now EU is one of the places on earth where you can produce 1 kilo of animal protein with the lowest emissions. So there's a lot of reasons that poultry meat should be discussed when we are talking about sustainability.
Thank you so much. I mean, that's really set a great overall picture of exactly why we're here today. And following on from that, so it's interesting to hear, you know, you talking about this distinction between different kinds of meat and the low impact, you know, in sustainability terms. But I think, can I just turn to Frédéric? And I know that you have done a lot of work in the livestock sector generally, and also on cattle. Can I ask you, how does the poultry sector compare in terms of sustainability compared with other areas of the meat sector in terms of its carbon footprint, for example, as Berta just said, and how important is it to situate and kind of differentiate poultry in the discussion on sustainability rather than a kind of blanket discussion on meat?
It is a very complicated question. I mean, at least to give a concise answer to this question is rather challenging because it's very multidimensional, and it's I know it always gets lumped into CO2 equivalents per kilogram of, you know, material or protein or kilocal, but it's much more complicated than that. The comparisons that we see are usually rather unfair, I would say. Even between animal products, it gets quite complicated because a piece of beef is mostly judged on its methane emissions, and we increasingly know that this is a complicated matter. It's a strong greenhouse gas, but it's also very different than CO2 in the atmosphere. We also have to take into account the amount of nutrients that something brings in, you know, if we express climate change impact. So that makes it all very complicated to compare different food sources to each other. Now, it is true that monogastrics are very efficient in feed conversion, especially within the current scientific paradigm we have of optimization and efficiency and management. So we're very good at producing quality protein with low inputs. That certainly is valid for poultry. But even ruminant production, if well done, if it's well performed, is a very powerful system as well, because it allows you to convert basically grass into quality nutrition. So it all depends on how you look at it, with what you scale it, what is your research question, how do you want to define it. So I cannot give a very, I don't really look positively upon comparing things on a one-to-one basis in this matter. I think you better see them within dietary patterns and how that covers your nutritional needs.
Okay, so as we heard from Frédéric, a very kind of complex, multidimensional issue here. Sabine, my question for you, how can we kind of incorporate this kind of nuance into the farm to fork strategy and this kind of complex area? For example, how can we ensure that targets such as on antimicrobial resistance, for example, take into account the different starting points and particularities within the meat sector?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it was already a very, very good discussion. I mean, I think, you know, what Birte said, for example, you know, on the relatively lower climate impact of poultry meat, on the achievement of emissions. I don't want to belittle this at all. I think this discussion should also look, and also what Frédéric said, you know, there is not really a huge merit in comparing one-on-one, you know, the consumption of this, that, or the other meat. I think what I would really like to turn to in the discussion is some of the actual and some of the perceived weaknesses of the poultry meat production. Not sure you can hear and see me, but anyhow. So I think what we should also be discussing is, you know, for example, what range of sources for poultry feed are there? How sustainable are they in the context of climate, in the context of social considerations, economic considerations? How about animal welfare in poultry production? Is there margin for improvement? How about emissions, leakages of nutrients, or, for example, how about the use of antimicrobials? And that brings me to your question, Natasha, because yes, the strategy has set out a couple of, I would say, political aspirational targets that are pointing out some of the crucial areas that collectively our food system should and needs to be addressing, be it in the interest of public health or One Health, animal health, and public health in the context of the development of antimicrobial resistance, or be it in the interest of our environment as regards leakage of nutrients. So you asked me how to take into account the different starting points. We clearly take into account the different starting points much more on the level of the various member states, because, for example, let's talk of antimicrobial resistance and the reduction of the use of antimicrobials in animal production. Some member states, in some areas, in some production systems, have already made huge efforts, have already gone a long way to reduce the use of antimicrobials, and yes, this is and will be recognized. Now, we will have over time more and more detailed information, say, on that topic, also with regards to the different production systems, with regards to trends, and that will allow us also over time, if necessary, to come in with specific measures from a possibly regulatory point of view, if needed, to really target those who are lagging behind, those areas that are not moving along. So it will be a mix of, you know, having an overall objective, acknowledging the different starting points, but also then clearly monitoring, you know, how is progress. And as I said, I would like the discussion to turn more and more to the areas where also the poultry sector maybe themselves see, you know, the possibility and the scope for improving sustainability, as complex as the concept is, but sustainability in all its breadth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just following on from that, just a follow-up question there. I think it was Frédéric in his introductory remarks that asked about the possibility of an impact assessment. In terms of, you know, the different starting points and the different ways that the farm to fork strategy will affect different elements of the sector. Sabine, would the Commission look to, is that something the Commission is considering, to carry out impact assessment on the effects of targets for, you know, each individual sector?
Let's put it that way. I mean, this is a strategy. This strategy is widely discussed now. This is what we wanted. The member states are discussing, the sectors are discussing, the consumers are discussing, the parliament is discussing. And the Commission is very much committed, in case it goes forward, you know, in particular with regulatory measures, to carry out impact assessments. Also, we would like to know, what does all of this mean in terms of impact, say, for example, on production levels, affordability, effect on climate, and what have we. We are under no illusion that we have quite a number also of competing objectives. This is not a secret. And as we will be going forward, for example, with our framework law on sustainable food systems, we will be discussing and defining what is sustainability for us in Europe. What do we mean? What is important for us? Because I'm sure if I say sustainability, Frédéric, Jonty, and yourself, and Birte, we all have a little bit of a different slant to, you know, what does it mean? And I think the communication gives a bit of an idea how broad the topic is, including animal health, animal welfare, consumption, production, and so on and so forth. So yes, there will be impact assessments, in particular when it comes to hard regulatory measures. We might see also impact assessments along the way on you know, codes and guidance, but that is less evident, if I may say. I would hope that those that are part of food systems, including sectors, do a bit of that work also for themselves. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that position. And so as you just mentioned animal welfare, I'm just going to turn to that topic now. So Jonty, as we've mentioned, animal welfare is a key theme of the Farm to Fork strategy. In your opinion, is the EU poultry sector doing enough on animal welfare? And as Sabine was asking, what improvements have you seen the sector make so far, and what improvements still need to be done? What would you like to see done in the sector?
Yeah, thanks, Natasha. It's a really important question. I think we need to be careful here when we're talking around relatives. So Europe does have relatively high animal welfare standards. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are high, I would argue. I think if you look at the European chicken commitment, if we take chicken specifically, and look at the criteria under the ambition there, the criteria within the broader directive doesn't match up there. So if we delve into some of the specifics, fast-growing breeds of chicken are allowed under EU law. The European chicken commitment requires slower-growing breeds. That's better for animal welfare, but it's also potentially better for the environment, because you have chickens that don't necessarily need to be fed such a high-protein diet, and therefore don't need to be fed soy, potentially, which for obvious reasons means you can reduce your environmental impact too. There's also issues around enrichments and stocking densities. It's 42 kilos per square metre that's allowed within Europe. I believe with the leg health plan, it's 30 kilos per square metre that is required under the European chicken commitment. So I don't want to get too technical, but there are some areas that are clearly not aligned between what industry is starting to see as best practice and what's set out under EU law. So I think there's definitely still some ways to go.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And continuing on the theme of animal welfare, I want to turn the discussion towards another key issue, and that's antimicrobial resistance. While there's a strong focus of the strategy on reducing antibiotic use, Frédéric, I'd like to ask you, the question is, how can the sector balance this need to reduce medication in the poultry sector while also maintaining a high standard of animal welfare, ensuring no animals get sick, the balancing act between the two?
Well, I think we already have seen a major shift in paradigm compared to the past. So things have improved a lot. It's a very difficult thing to manage, but the results have been quite impressive. And it's not the end of the road either. We're not there yet. We have had substantial reductions in use. We also have now the more targeted use, which actually should be the case. We should use our antibiotics when they're needed and not on a systemic basis. So I think advances in veterinary science and risk management and the way that European scientists have been developing procedures and applications has yielded some very impressive and good results. In several countries, we have reductions in antibiotics that are really of a magnitude of 70-80% over a series of years. So it's going in the right direction, but it still needs more research, because the challenges keep on moving in a world where also the food supply system keeps on changing. And this is a matter of prioritizing the science to make it even better.
Okay, and on that topic, Berta, I'd like to bring you in for your response to both of those answers. So we had Jonty, he spoke about there was a misalignment between maybe what some of the producers are doing and between the EU regulation, and also on Frédéric's point about science and innovation and how that can help us reduce antibiotic use. Could you comment on those two responses, please, Berta?
Definitely, I would be very happy to. When it comes to animal welfare, I totally understand the points that Jonty made. I would like to start by saying that in Europe we have legislation on animal welfare as one of the only parts of the world where we have that. That legislation is based on science made by EFSA and other good institutions. I'm not saying that that should be set in stone and that we can't improve, not at all. But I can say, as a veterinarian, I was educated a veterinarian many years ago, but still, I can say that if a farmer complies with the rules in the EU legislation, then the animal welfare is okay. We can improve, and maybe we should, and maybe that should be a part of our goals in the Farm to Fork strategy. There's just one little thing I would like to raise then, because we also need to have a market for the products. And unfortunately, it is still so that the consumers, when they go out and buy their poultry meat, they are looking more in their wallet than into their hearts. And I've heard the MEP, Herbert Dorfman, he is saying right now in different debates that the Farm to Fork strategy has a little bit too little effort on fork, because if you look at the Farm to Fork strategy, there's no targets for the consumers. And I understand perfectly, it's very, very difficult to make targets for the consumers. But if you want to change a chain, then it's easier to pull it than to push it. So if the farmers, and they would love to make poultry meat with other animal welfare standards, but there needs to be a market for it, because it will be more costly. Mm-hmm. We already have the highest production costs in the world here in Europe, and that is fine, because that secures that we produce with very high standards, and we should stay that way, that's for sure. But we are not competitive towards the rest of the world, and we already import a lot of poultry meat from third countries where the animal welfare standards, the use of antibiotics and so forth is not totally the same as they are here in the EU. So we are really willing to find out how to solve this problem, to be able to have a market for those products in the future. That would be fine. When it comes to antimicrobial resistance, that's so important an issue. And I'm really proud to be European when it comes to this. That back in under Commissioner Andriukaitis, he started out the One Health issue, and that Europe should go in front on fighting antimicrobial resistance. And it's so important. I mean, and there I can say from the poultry sector that we have several members, several countries where they have on initiatives from either from the combination of the sectors themselves and the states, or from the state or the sector, making initiatives to reduce the use of antibiotics with a lot. We are talking reductions with 70 to 80% over 5 years. So there is really room for, you know, they have shown that there is room for improvement. For them who have been the front runners, the room for improvement is a bit smaller than for those who haven't started yet. But it is a very important issue and we take it very seriously. Again, we need to say, in the US, for instance, they have a tendency to use it as a marketing issue. They say no antibiotics ever. That's good. But when you say no antibiotics ever, then the animal welfare goes down the drain, because sometimes animals get ill and then you need to be able to treat them. So we are saying use as little as possible, but as much as necessary. So I think that's sort of was the comment. Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you very much. Actually, you touched on two kind of big topics there, one about trade and talking more globally, and I'll come back to that, I think, a little bit later in the discussion. But if for now I could just talk a little bit more on the consumer side of things, which is also something you raised there, you know, how we can raise the demand for these kind of products. Jonty, there is talk currently in the EU of an animal welfare label to help consumers choose, you know, help them understand the welfare standards that the animal has been raised with. Is that something you would welcome? Is that something that you think people have an appetite for? Could this help ensure high welfare standards?
I think in principle it's something, it would be a discussion we would welcome. I think the challenge, what we don't want to have is too many labels and the consumer, us getting confused when we're doing our shopping and therefore just switching off and choosing the very cheapest product. So I think we need to tread quite carefully there. There are already quite a lot of good labels out there that denote certain high welfare standards. So yeah, I think it's something that should definitely be explored, whether it's a new label we need or a combining of labels that already exist. I think that's also something worth exploring. I would also add, I mean, just very quickly on the antibiotics side of things, I completely agree. The situation that we're seeing in the US, no antibiotics ever, doesn't make sense to us at all. We recognise that animals, of course, need to be treated when they're ill. And on the cost side of things, I think consumers, there's definitely a misalignment between willingness to pay studies and what consumers are actually willing to pay. We understand that, of course. But there's a growing number of consumers who are willing to pay more for high welfare meat, if you can tell a good story behind that and if you can show where the benefits are coming from. It's interesting, in the Netherlands we see that not high welfare but higher welfare chicken has become almost the new baseline in supermarkets like Jumbo and Albert Heijn. And we, just a final point, we commissioned a study with the University of Wageningen looking at the production costs of chicken meat from conventional systems and higher welfare systems, and found that in the Netherlands, US, Brazil, Thailand, and China, the cost of shifting from a conventional system to a high welfare system was only 6 to 9 euro cents per kilogram of live weight. So I think there's a question mark for me over the outcomes that are coming from some of the industry studies around production cost increases. Whether the consumer should pay all of that, I don't think so. I think that should be borne throughout the value chain. And that's a complex matter, but I think it's definitely worth considering.
Okay, so keeping with the theme of kind of consumer choice, Sabine, we've spoken a bit about an animal welfare label and the issues of labelling, but how else can we ensure the ambitions of the Farm to Fork strategy are matched with an increase in demand for high quality, sustainably produced meat? How can the EU facilitate this?
Well, to be perfectly clear, I don't think we want to facilitate an increase in demand for high quality protein. I'm coming back to the first point. I mean, people may say what they want, but we know that in principle, European diets are not in line with dietary guidelines, and people do consume too much of certain nutrients. So a priori, there's not a deficit in protein supply in people's diets. So I don't think it is this what we want. I do understand where Birte comes from in terms of, the consumers, even if they are well informed, may not follow on with their food choices when they are buying, and also not necessarily with their dietary habits. But I think there are several instruments, and still consumer information is one of them, to help people, living more healthier, making more sustainable choices. And if you go through the action plan that the Commission has devised in this regard, you will find quite a number of proposals to improve labeling, increase labeling, extend labeling. And for me, this is all accumulating in what is the sustainability labeling framework, which is still a little bit further away, 2024, which conceptually in our idea summarizes quite a number of sustainability factors. So we want to make it easier for the consumer. They wouldn't have to look for a health label, an animal welfare label, an environmental label, but they could look at one place and see, is this basically sustainable or not. That's very difficult, that's very challenging, but this is where we would like to go on the basis of our definition for us, what is sustainability. In terms of production costs and demands on producers, I think we should not forget that we have other supporting frameworks, and it is not least the Common Agricultural Policy, which is under heated negotiation currently. But we want, from the Commission's side, again, I repeat myself, those who make this transition, those who do the extra step, by first complying with the legislation, but maybe possibly going beyond that, we want these to be rewarded, also economically rewarded, and therewith part of their maybe acknowledged increased production costs to be offset by the support they are getting from the various schemes. This is very much enshrined in the proposal. This is for antimicrobial resistance or the reduced use of antibiotics. This is for environmental aspects, and so on and so forth. So it is not that it is only depending on the consumer end of matters, but the consumer end of matters is important. Maybe if I may say, and not to forget, it's the individual consumer, but it is also very often the consumer in an institutional setting. So a lot of food that we consume is being procured for us. I mean, if we ever live our normal lives again, we go to the canteen, we go to, the places where food is procured for us, and there also the Commission intends to support the concept of sustainable procurement that is more rewarding and giving more economic opportunities that are in line with these provisions.
Great. Okay. Well, I think I'll
Yeah,
just.
otherwise others never get the chance.
I think I will just bring Berta in to respond to this comment. I'd actually like to say something to that, and then afterwards I have a question for Jonty related to this idea of institutions and businesses. Berta?
Thanks a lot. I really think that the way of giving incentives to everybody in the food chain to try to be more sustainable, like you were explaining about, Sabine, in the CAP is a really good idea. I just want to highlight that the European poultry sector have never been subsidized. That's quite contrary to the other farming sectors. The European poultry sector have always been very flexible and ready to change. So we haven't been subsidized until now, but maybe that will change in the future. That's one thing. And then you came in with something really interesting about how much we eat in institutional settings and sustainable procurement, that the Commission wants to promote that. Really good. Then I have one thing I would really, really kindly ask of you. Couldn't we then please get labeling in these settings as well? Because the poultry meat that you eat in your canteen or in the hospital or in a restaurant might very easily come from a third country. 25% of the poultry breast meat we eat here in the EU are imported from third countries. And this import goes into food service, so it ends up in canteens or in processed products. So we would really, really like if there were a labeling EU/non-EU, and then if it's non-EU, the country it comes from, because then the consumers really have the possibility to make an informed choice before they grab their Caesar salad or their club sandwich.
An EU, non-EU label is a very interesting topic. Thank you, Berta. So I'm just going to bring you in, Jonty, because there's been a lot of discussion here about how about the role of businesses and how they can support the poultry sector in just achieving sustainability goals. So how can we encourage companies to commit to the sustainable choice? I know you spoke a little bit about the programs you've been working on. Maybe you could elaborate on what you've found works and what doesn't work. And then afterwards, I will turn to Frédéric for a question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Natasha. I think what works really well is showing that momentum is building. I don't think companies, I understand this, of course, I don't think companies want to be the first to necessarily put their head above the parapet and make a firm commitment if they're not sure if the rest of industry is going to follow. As I said in my opening remarks, over 150 companies have now signed up to the European Chicken Commitment. So that's really compelling. When we're going to talk to a company, we can say, well, this group of companies across a variety of sectors have made a firm commitment to improving chicken welfare by 2026 in this case, and that those companies aren't small, they're not niche, they are the KFCs of the world, Nestle, Unilever, these giant global companies that don't take decisions lightly, and when they make a choice, that can have a very strong ripple effect throughout the supply chain. We also talk a lot around consumer demand and how that's changing. So keeping an eye on polls that are coming out and seeing how diets are shifting and how values are shifting. I think there is a concern from companies that if they don't try and develop a stronger USP around their chicken, then plant-based alternatives, including chicken alternatives, may come along and kind of steal the show. So I think it's important for companies these days to have a strong product portfolio that can really that has a good story behind it. And I think animal welfare is something that they can use there to good advantage.
Thank you very much. And I just want to come back to something that Sabine mentioned, talking about kind of combining the different the different sustainability but also health kind of labels for the consumer. Frédéric, on the topic of human health, I wanted to ask you how intertwined are the conversations on sustainability and nutrition? Can practices help both reduce the environmental impact of poultry meat and also improve its nutrition? How important is nutrition also in this sustainability conversation?
It's absolutely fundamental, I would say, in the sustainability conversation, and it's not a one-on-one relationship neither, because we have studies that show that sometimes the healthy option is the less sustainable one, or sometimes it is. It all depends on how it's formulated. I've heard some interesting points. I would say that my personal stance, especially on the labeling, is that I'm not very much in favor of over labeling products. And that's for the simple reason that what happens if you label products is that what we're usually seeing is that a lot of complexity again, whether it be nutritional sustainability, is reduced in a letter code or in a color code that is supposed to tell the consumer if it's healthy or sustainable. It's all way too complex to do that. And the Nutri-Score, for instance, shows that you get some really bizarre results if you follow the Nutri-Score. So I'm not very much in favor of labeling. I'm in favor of traceability labeling, and I think the comment on EU origin is a good one. People have to know where the product is coming from, how it was produced, but that's a different thing than identifying a logo or a symbol that says if it's healthy or not or sustainable or not. So that's not my route of preference. And what I would like to add as well is that. Because it has been mentioned before, we do have a major issue with public health. That's clear. Public nutrition is not at its best state, and it's getting worse every year. So we have a huge challenge in turning around metabolic syndrome and pre-diabetes and diabetes. There's a lot of work to be done, but the way we need to do that needs to be aligned on two main principles. The first one is that we have to reduce a lot ultra-processed food intake, because that's one of the main driving forces, is ultra-processed foods. And secondly, we have to make sure that we provide adequate essential nutrition to the population. So it's not all that much that we are giving too much of some nutrients. It is rather that we are giving too little of many nutrients in general. And that would even include protein. We tend to see protein as something that is largely abundant in the system. It is not. It depends on how you look at the requirements. The requirements that usually are used are the ones for minimal standards, not for optimal standards. And some population groups in particular are underfed on protein level. I'm not saying that everybody needs more protein, but there are certain important segments in the population that would benefit from more protein. And I'm talking about the metabolically unhealthy, I'm talking about elderly, about growing populations. So we shouldn't go all too lightly about a protein transition, because first of all, it's not only about protein, it's about many other things as well. And secondly, protein needs are sometimes severely underestimated.
Thank you very much. Sabine, maybe I will turn to you. So we've now had this idea of an EU label scheme mentioned several times now by our panelists. I wondered if you'd like to come in on that and respond to that with the Commission's kind of side of that, whether you'd be considering that, and also maybe you would also like to comment on what Frédéric said about the undernutrition and the link with human health and sustainability.
I start with the undernutrition. I mean, also this we know, this is also recognized. I know that there is roughly 10% of our population, for various reasons, have an issue on affordability of quality meals. That is true. We know that from a dietary point of view, certain population strata are simply not getting what they need. Not maybe necessarily out of question of affordability, but basically knowledge and attention to particular issues in their diet. So this is quite well known. We have a big program and also quite some important work to do on food waste prevention, because there in particular with our work that we do together with organizations that look after the deprived, we understand the topic, we understand the issue, and that's why also affordability of food is on our radar very much so. And that is also why we are paying a lot of attention and trying to pave the maximum way, also to enable donation of food to those that are in need. So it is indeed true. diets, healthy diets, are an extremely complex situation. That's why it is not, we can't come with easy solutions and we say we have a big campaign, to promote high quality proteins in everybody's diet, because we need a differentiated approach. I thought it was interesting what Frederick said about labels and him not being in favor of some, possibly in favor of others. It is not so straightforward how we best help the consumers, because indeed consumers want to be informed, they want to have the basis for their choices. We don't even know for all aspects, will they make the choices the way we think? But that's why a sustainability label is the intermediate endpoint of our thinking, because it is not very easy for a consumer, to offset one aspect of sustainability against the other. We know there are many people who are very concerned about animal welfare, and they will, for example, always take this as the most important decision aspect for themselves. And we have to think about ways to help these people. The same for health choices, the other for environmental. So it is extremely complex. What I wanted to say on the topic of animal welfare, because I've been listening very carefully to Jonty, and I think also what he was saying about fast-growing chicken, slow-growing chicken. Immediately, such a choice will have an effect on the conversion rate, on other aspects of sustainability. So again, very complex. On animal welfare, just basically to say we are currently starting an evaluation of all the framework. We would like really to see, is it robust enough? Birte reminded us, yes, in Europe we have that framework. We have to see, is it enforceable? Is it enforced? Can it be better? Should it be better? And shall we also flank this system with future animal welfare labeling? I think these are all considerations that are happening now that we have to work our way through. Labeling is a way, and it has been very successful, for example, in the organic sector, to transport the added value through the value chain. So basically to inform the consumer and basically make them spend more for certain aspects. So it might not wash for every consumer, not for everyone in every context, but it is a way of transporting the value through the value chain and making it making the particularities of the food known to the consumer, and many of them will actually pay more. Now, it's complex. I expect quite heated discussions when we work in Europe on our sustainable food framework, because that for me will be very, very interesting. What are the key features of sustainability for us in Europe? And I would want to say this will also include social aspects, conditions of workers here and abroad, and will not make it less complex than what we see now. Labeling is one outer aspect, but I think we have through this discussion to really also think about the intrinsic values of food, if we label it in the end or not, but we have to understand it. Companies have to understand it to make also their choices on the basis of a better understanding. And surely, Frederick, you don't have to remind us, we need science, robust science, to understand also the various offsets. And on top, the EU is funding through the programs quite a lot of this.
I decline,
Great.
Natasha, just for one.
Yep, Bertie, you'd like to jump in? Yep.
Just very shortly, we have noted that the Commission have started the evaluation of the existing regulation on animal welfare, and we really welcome that, and we definitely hope to be taken in as a stakeholder in this evaluation. We have lots of data, we have lots of experts that can provide lots of good knowledge to this evaluation, and we sincerely hope that we will be taken in, and so we can have discussions, because again, I can't state it enough times. We really need to work together here to try to make things as good as possible for the future. So please invite us in with our data and our experts. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks for your comments. And I just want to finish up, because I am conscious that time is ticking and I want to leave space for the questions from the audience. But I want to finish up talking a bit more globally and talking about trade. And it's a topic that we briefly touched upon. But the farm to fork strategy is set to have a considerable effect on EU trade policy, and there are concerns within the poultry sector of the effect of meat imported into the EU. So, Berthe, what in your opinion will the effect be of imports and exports of the farm to fork strategy? What is your main concern from the poultry sector?
Well, there is, and Sabine Schülliger have said it already, that there is, she knows that there is some contradictory things in the farm to fork policy and the Commission work as such. And one of them is that a Mercosur agreement was made last year, where there was granted 180,000 ton extra poultry meat to the Mercosur countries, which are already exporting 500,000 tons of poultry meat into the EU every year. And as it is per se, we import 900,000 tons of poultry meat, and that will then come above 1,000. We import 300,000 tons of beef. We import 200,000 tons of sheep and goat meat, and only 20,000 tons of pork. So we really feel the imports in the poultry sector. And to have a Mercosur agreement to import so much more poultry meat from Brazil, at the same time starting out a biodiversity strategy where you will try to avoid deforestation and so forth, that might not be very coherent. But many other people than me touch upon that, so that's obvious. But we fear a little bit that the farm to fork, if there's put too many demands upon the sectors in the farm to fork strategy, then the European products could be so costly that it's not any longer seen as possible for many European consumers to buy European products, and then they will have to buy the products imported from third countries where the standards might not be the same. When it comes for exports, then we, in Europe, we prefer to eat the breast meat. And then, of course, the European producers, they try to sell the wings and the legs and other things to other countries than the European ones. And there, the high standards of animal welfare and sustainability might not be valued as much as they do here in Europe, which means that it can be difficult to sell these products at a price that would match the production costs. But of course, there is a good opportunity to try to get the EU consumers to eat the whole chicken. That would be fantastic. So let's make a campaign for that. If the Commission will help us with that, then we would be grateful.
Sabine, perhaps you'd like to come in on Berthe's comments there, talking a little bit more about the effects of farm to fork strategy on trade in the poultry sector and how the Commission will work to safeguard EU poultry producers.
Well, I mean, there are a few things I would like to ask Bill directly. I mean, the so and so many 100,000 tons of import, how do they stand vis-a-vis the tons of export and the tons of overall consumption? I mean, I'm not doubting your figures for 1 second, but I think for the listener, it should be put in perspective at basically consumption in Europe and export. This being said, you know, I take a little bit issue on saying, you know, when if and when we import, it is immediately in some way substandard. I think you have to be differentiating a little bit. What exactly are you talking about? You spoke about Brazil and deforestation. Again, the Commission is not sitting on its hands. We are very active in policy making, and then also in policy making in context with third countries on the issue of deforestation. And with all due respect, whether the soy that contributes to deforestation is then fed in Brazil or fed in Europe, a priori, I cannot see, the benefit of it being fed in Europe if it comes from a source that contributes to deforestation. So I think overall we have to be a little bit careful in our narrative. But what is the idea of the Commission in this strategy, but moreover in the Green Deal? Yes, we understand that we want to raise certain standards for ourselves in Europe, for our production, our consumption. We want to be a front runner globally. So that is bringing certain lacks, if I may say, in timing. But we would also very much like a very deep and intense discussion and exchange with our trading partners. Because in principle, the vast majority of our trading partners have made a very comparable analysis of the issues around food systems. They may not exactly be at the same point in time in terms of, having made the decision where they would like to go next. But in terms of analysis, we are not so far apart. So we're looking for alliances. Yes, if we negotiate future trade agreements, we really want to strengthen the sustainability chapters and sustainability reflections in these trade agreements, be it on issues like climate, deforestation, food production standards. So it will be much more intense. Mm-hmm. It is a journey. I'm not denying this. I mean, I'm very clear just by the Commission putting out a strategy. It's not switching, flipping the switch. It is a journey, but I'm very optimistic and hopeful that also many of our trading partners have made the diagnosis, and they will make that journey. Not necessarily identically with us, but in some way with us, maybe with a short time delay.
Great.
And that makes me optimistic that, globally speaking, we can improve something. Mm-hmm. And I'm also putting the question to Birte about these exports. I mean, what is the analysis of sustainability effects of these exports on third country markets? We have to ask these fairly inconvenient questions to ourselves as a major global trader, importing and exporting.
It's very interesting comments. We just have time for one last comment. I know, Bertie, you're dying to get in. I can see you on the edge of your chair. Just if you could make it as concise as possible, just so that we have time for the Q&A, and then I will hand you over to my colleague Teresa for the Q&A. So, Bertie, just one last comment in response to that.
Definitely. When it comes to the importing of soy, we are having certificates of the soy coming from non-deforestation areas. So, and together with our very good colleagues in FIFAC, the Feed Association, we of course are working hard on that. And we are also endorsing a European protein plan where we try to source much more of our protein in Europe. And when it comes to the exports and the sustainability of that, I would recommend everybody here to follow DG Agri, because they are going to have a seminar on exports from the European agricultural sector to other countries very soon. And there will be something about the European poultry meat exports as well. And I don't have the date, but I'm sure it's going to be here in the autumn. And that's going to be very interesting because there is a report from Dutch authorities recently, the Dutch government, that it actually is quite sustainable to export poultry meat to African countries. But that's a very long story. We'll get there soon. DG Agri seminar this autumn. There we go.
We'll delve deeper into that topic then. Thank you very much, Bertha. So thank you for such an interesting panel discussion. I'm now going to pass you over to my colleague Teresa for the Q&A. So we have a number of questions that have come in from our audience.
Thank you very much, Natasha. So diving directly into the questions, the first two questions are for John T, actually. So when we are tackling climate crisis, is there danger that we do it in cost of poultry welfare? And then the second question is about slower growing breeds. They might be better for welfare, but are they not worse for environmental impact?
Right, two big questions. Yeah, so the first one, I think there is a risk that if we place only the lens on climate change, which of course it kind of goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, that it's incredibly important to tackle, that we let animal welfare fall by the wayside. And I think our view and the view of a large number of people now is that animal welfare isn't a trade-off. It's a non-negotiable that has to sit at the heart of any decision making. So yeah, we do have concerns that in the sort of discussions around what our future food system must look like, that chicken and fish, which tend to suffer disproportionately more than other species, that they're put forward as the solution. So we want to have a more rounded conversation around that. If I remember correctly, the second question was around the use of slow-growing breeds and their environmental impact.
Yes.
I would reflect again on my opening statement and some of the remarks around the fact that if a chicken species is slower growing, they don't necessarily have the protein requirements of some of the faster growing species, and therefore can be fed a diet that has less protein in it. So it doesn't always have to be soy. So I think we need to be careful to not have this this binary view of fast growing chicken is ultra efficient, slow growing chicken is inefficient. I think there's some interesting research that is happening and will continue to happen, hopefully looking at the environmental impact of both species, and I think it's not quite as nuanced. Sorry, it's more nuanced than many have said it is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. This second question that I have is for Frederick. Frederick, any thoughts on lab-grown protein and its impact in the next 10 years?
Yeah, that question comes a lot. Well, we've been hearing about it since a while. It is still in that lab, it's still not on the market. So we have to distinguish also between, the plant-based imitations and the ones that are really actual muscle tissues that are produced in the lab. I think it meets a bit my general. So whether it's sustainable or not is a whole topic on itself, because it also comes with its own requirements. It also will have implications on how we manage grasslands and so on. But one of my main concerns with the whole let's get food from the lab paradigm is that it bypasses one of the aspects which to me is one of the most important ones. We do have science working hard on sustainability and nutrition, but what we're missing a bit is maybe more input from the humanities and from the social sciences, because we urgently need to get back to the concept of nourishment. And with nourishment, I mean getting food back on the table in communities, which will help nutritional value, it will help sustainability, it will help animal welfare, it will improve our relationship with, human-animal interactions will improve. The concept of nourishment is absolutely vital. And anything that will put food in a lab is contradictory to that ideal scenario that I'm trying to portray here. So I think it's disconnecting us even further from wholesome approaches to the diet than I would like to see personally.
Thank you. Would any of the other panelists like to take this question as well? Have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I would just add there.
Yes,
just quickly, I think it's part of the mix, I would say. when we're thinking about what the future of food looks like, I think we need a mix of smaller amounts of high welfare animal protein, plant-based proteins as well, plants. We don't always have to shoot straight for mimicking meat, just plants, fruit, vegetables, but also lab-grown meat. I think although it's in its infancy and still quite expensive, is developing rapidly. So it'll be interesting to see the results as they start to come to market.
Thank you very much. And so moving on to the next question on taxation to Sabine, actually. So Sabine, what about the change? What about a possible change in the poultry imports taxation? Natalie Balafa defends that it should be reshaped to make EU poultry more competitive. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, here I have to admit that I'm not a taxation expert,
Of course.
but we obviously do recognize the instrument of taxation in this whole discussion, and it is an instrument. It's an instrument that, in particular, member states could use. I'm not now specifically replying to the question of import taxes to this topic. More generally speaking, import taxation is something to be thought about, but I have the feeling we should really rather reflect on our relation with third countries. I mean, we do recognize that the possibility to export to Europe is for several third countries, for many third countries, economically very important. And, you know, again, we have to have a careful reflection before, you know, making this type of trade unsustainable for third country players. We have to think, you know, what effect does it have if we cut trade also with some of the more developing countries to the level that it doesn't exist anymore, and what are the social consequences there. So, I mean, what I think we would like is that those European consumers that, or European, that also imports are produced in a more sustainable way. Basically, we want to externalize, you know, our reflections. We want animal welfare standards to be high everywhere around the globe, and particularly there where one produces for Europe. That's a difficult discussion, but one to be held. So I would rather more think, you know, that it is not by using these trade instruments and cutting the exchange, but rather by, you know, nudging up standards, by also rewarding those in third countries that, you know, produce more sustainably. Just very quickly on Jonty's concern, you know, and animal welfare is not negotiable. And to be very clear also from the Commission side, that's also why we carry out this evaluation, and to see, you know, where it needs strengthening and it needs bettering, not the opposite. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And a question now to Bertha from a member of our audience, Stig Munk-Lasten. He asks, how do you see the trade-off between more organic and free-range production and sustainable production? Do you see it as a trade-off?
Well, I think it's very important that we have a segmentation of the different production methods in Europe, because there is consumers, there's customers for all the segments. But we need to be aware that I totally buy what Jonty said about slower growing birds might not need as the same protein source as faster growing birds, but they live for a longer time. So if they eat more and they drink more water, so it might have an impact also on the sustainability. So we need to take all the different aspects into account when we make policies for the future. But I think it's very important, and our producers, both the farmers and the poultry meat processors, they are more than willing to use free range birds, organic birds, and so forth for their products, if there is a market that will actually buy them. So, as I said before, we need the market before we can start producing the products.
Thank you, Berta. And one final question to Jonty. You have mentioned the European chicken commitment a couple of times, and Paul Lopez asks, who will pay for a rise? If the price rises, who will actually pay? So how sustainable do you think this is?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think at the moment, companies have made the commitment. They haven't necessarily put it into practice, so that's yet to be seen. But it's from conversations I've had with companies, they're broadly willing to absorb the cost as a part of their business. That may change depending on the market. So it may be, for example, in the fast food sector or the QSR sector, that they have more volume, so they can absorb the cost more readily, while some companies are less able to do that.
Thank you very much, thank you very much, Joost, and thank you to our audience for their questions. I'm now passing on to Natasha for the closing statements.
Thank you very much, Teresa. So before we wrap up today's event, I would just like to turn to our panelists for a few closing statements on what we've heard and what we've discussed today. So let me start with Frédéric. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I welcome the dialogue always. I mean, dialogue is absolutely primordial if you want to move forward. And I would maybe also like to add that it's that we shouldn't see things too apocalyptically either. I mean, we have to realize that we're starting from a privileged position in Europe. We have a very resilient food system. In the first place, we managed to produce high quantities of food very efficiently compared to other places in the world. And certainly it needs to be improved. And all dimensions of sustainability, nutrition, and animal welfare need to be addressed. And it's being done. Let's not forget that as well. It's being done. So if we advocate for change, we have to do that very carefully. Not go to radical interventions. Just do them fact-based, rationally, and with ahead of us the interest of the public and society. I think the framework of Farm to Fork is a suitable one. We can argue about some of its premises, but the framework is basically what everybody wants. It's healthier diets and more sustainable diets. So let's talk within that framework and keep the dialogue going.
Thank you very much, Frédéric. I will now turn to Berta for your closing statements.
Thanks a lot. And like Frédéric, I would like to say thanks a lot for the debate. I think it's been really interesting. And I think it's very promising to see that there are more things that we agree on that we disagree on. And that's really very promising. I really find that. I just want to make a little advertisement that I'm allowed to today because I have the word. AVEC is a part of the European Livestock Voice, which are 11 associations joined together, all working in some part with livestock production. All associations based here in Brussels. And we have created a website called www.meetthefacts.eu. And I would really encourage everybody to go in and have a look at it, because we have realized that we from the farming and food producing sectors have been not very good at telling what's actually going on out there for the last many years. So we have created this website to try to talk about how things are going, what we are doing, and some of the myths that are floating around, try to get rid of them. So please have a look at that website and see what we're doing there. And then I really hope that the European Livestock Voice, that AVEC and other good associations and companies and NGOs and so forth can be drawn into the discussion, so we together can make a resilient and sustainable, healthy food system for the EU for the future to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I will turn to Sabine for your closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, first of all, many thanks to my fellow panelists. What I got from the discussion is that whilst not everybody agrees to maybe all the details in the farm to fork strategy, I found a lot of good reception of the main ideas, the main concepts, and the main solutions that are in there. So I think that is very encouraging for our common way forward. What I would like to say is every player, every sector should be put in front of their responsibilities. And I'm also very encouraged by the contributions of Birte, where she, acknowledges and reports about the work of the sector, for example, with regards to sustainable poultry feed and the progress that is made there. The same with the reduction of antimicrobials. So that tells me, the sector is taking this up, and I can only encourage this sector and any other to do so. There was a very interesting question on who will pay for all of this. To be very, very clear, what the European Commission and its proposals, not only on the strategy, but also on the whole financial framework around it, be it the CAP, the Common Fisheries Policy, the Horizon, the Horizon Programme for Research, the various programs for the support of rural area. What we put there is a lot of flanking measures. What we really want to see is those being rewarded, getting extra for, starting this transition, making the steps in this transition. It is producers, it's retailers, it is manufacturers, it's many of them. So that should pay for some of the changes.
Great, thank you very much, Sabine. I'll let you just finish that remark, and then I'll pop to Jonty.
Yeah, sure. I quickly mentioned food waste. We afford in Europe food waste. If we stop that, we would have a lot of money in our pockets, including in consumer pockets, to make maybe more expensive purchases. This has to stop. Food waste is absolutely something that has to stop. Also, our poor diets, they are not coming for free. They cost us a lot of money. So if we change to more healthy diets, we also have the capacity to have, again, more money in our pockets and to buy more sustainable. And now I stop. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much for raising that important topic. And lastly, I will turn to you, Jonty, for your closing remarks.
Thank you, and thank you to all the fellow panelists. I'd just like to reiterate what I said at the start, that despite being the provider of the world's most popular meat, billions, tens of billions of chickens around the world, including in Europe, in our view, are treated with insufficient regard for their welfare. We believe that has to change, and companies are thankfully starting to take note. But a lot more needs to be done. And just because animal welfare standards in Europe are relatively high, doesn't mean that they are in reality actually high. So we want to see better enforcement of existing standards, but also improvements to these standards. And hopefully, it sounds like we can move in that direction through the new strategy. And just finally, that animal welfare must not be treated as an optional extra. It really has to sit at the heart of decision making in order to create a food system that is truly just and truly sustainable. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Well, that brings today's discussion to a close. So I want to thank all of our panelists for this stimulating discussion, and also to the audience for their questions. Before we go, let me just remind you that the event will be available online afterwards on the EURACTIV YouTube channel, in case that you want to relive it all again. And also be sure to watch out for coverage of the event, which will be published by EURACTIV in the coming days. So that is all from us today. I'm Natasha Foote. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great afternoon.